When I see those words on a page, my brain instantly flips to efficiency. Instead of thinking about just being a trumpet meathead, we could think about being highly efficient. When we think about what is power in trumpet playing, power is being able to play in a way that gets your sound all the way to the back of the hall, or to really dominate a brass section in an orchestral setting, or to be able to lead an entire big band from that principal chair. That idea of power is really just that ability to be heard, to let your sound carry through, and to maybe play at a higher volume as well. What do we need to be able to do that? Well, of course, we could think ourselves as trumpet bodybuilders and just blast away the opposition with our trumpet power, but let's maybe think a little bit more constructively about how that could work. Instead of thinking about just being a trumpet meathead, we could think about being highly efficient. So when that comes to volume, volume doesn't have to be you breaking a sweat trying to play, just blow as much air out of your horn as possible. You could achieve a high volume just by playing with wonderful technique in a really healthy way. That way, the amount of input that you need to get the same very big, powerful result is a lot less. That's where I start to think about efficiency instead of power. So the same thing can be said for endurance, being able to endure a long playing session, or a long gig, or a recording, or whatever. Maybe you have multiple concerts over the course of a day. Being able to feel just as strong on your last note as you are on your first note, that's how I like to think about endurance. And I think a lot of us tend to see endurance as making withdrawals from a bank. You know, you've got your account that's a certain amount full when you start your day or you start your concert, and over the course of the day, you're pulling out of that bank, and at some point, you are going to run out of money. Your bank account's going to be dry, and you will not be able to play with any rhyme or reason for the rest of the day. That's a very easy way to be thinking about trumpet playing, but I don't think it's the healthiest or the right way that we should be thinking about it. When I think about endurance, I think about how can we play in such an efficient way that at the end of the day, we're just tired, we're not depleted. That's where, when I see these power and endurance ideas, I always go immediately to, how do I play more efficiently? So let's talk about that. Let's think, how do we play efficiently? Well, to do that, let's think, what is inefficient playing? What is playing that is by no means efficient? Well, I think that could be playing with a lot of pressure, playing where maybe you're really forcing a lot of air, or exerting a lot of effort from the lungs, and maybe not converting that into proper sound. Maybe not getting the right amount of vibration. Maybe you're getting a very diffuse sound or an airy sound because something here in the embouchure isn't quite dialed in the way you want it to be. You're not getting that maximum amount of for the air that you put in. That is inefficient playing. So let's correct it. Let's get to a place where those things don't exist. So one thing that I'm going to steal from my great friend Nathan Warner, a wonderful trumpet player from New York City, the idea of your embouchure being like a clock, where you've got numbers all the way around, 1 through 12 o'clock. When I'm playing, I try to make sure that I'm engaging all 12 numbers all the way around. So for sake of ease for today, let's think about 12, 6, 3, and 9. All right, so we've got our 4 points all around the edge. Let's make sure that all 4 of those points we're engaging in towards the center of the clock. So right where the hands all meet together at the center. I think it's pretty common for us as trumpet players to maybe engage 12 and 6, really push them together, but then 3 and 9 really pull back like this. That is a huge problem because all of a sudden we're only supporting with half of our face, just the top and bottom. We're not using our sides anymore. So we end up really pressing our mouthpiece into our lips, against our teeth, squishing our face. A lot of bad things happen, and we start playing inefficiently. So a great way to combat that is think, is my whole clock pointing in towards the center, towards the middle of my aperture when I play? Like that. You can test that doing just kind of like I did, doing a free buzz. You can use a visualizer. You could do that on your mouthpiece. You don't necessarily have to try that stuff on the trumpet to see if you're doing it correctly. But it is something to keep in mind, especially as you're starting to get into a long playing engagement. Am I engaging with my full circle here, and not letting things go by the wayside? Another thing to really make sure of is as you're engaging all that, keep your lips out. What do I mean? I mean, don't tuck anything, all right? I used to play in a way where I would tuck my lower lip in and roll it. It was kind of like I was rolling up a blinds. And the further I rolled it in, the higher I could play, but my tone quality started to change, and the volume that I could play with started to change, and my endurance went absolutely downhill. I could barely play for very long. And I could only roll in my lips so far. I got to a certain point, just couldn't roll it any higher, couldn't play any higher. And that rolling technique, I think, is a habit that can pretty easily be formed, but it is something that you can get out of. Again, we just need to think about 12, 3, 6, and 9 pointing into the center. So we've talked about how these things can help with efficiency, how our facial engagement, how not rolling and keeping things steady can help us be efficient. The next part that I want to talk about is tongue shape, again, as a review to when we talked about it in the other section. Making sure that we're funneling that air straight towards the embouchure and not letting it just aimlessly swirl around in our mouth. For one, it's going to help us get a really much better, fuller, broad spectrum sound. But it's also going to mean you have to exert a little bit less with your air to get a little more bang for your buck. So be thinking about, after we've got our engagement properly done here with the embouchure, think about how we're pointing that air forward with the tongue to make sure we're getting a great resonant and efficient response. So that gets us to where we start playing. We've got the physical motions figured out here a little bit. What actually happens when we start making noise? How can we continue to work on our efficiency? One thing I think it's really important to understand is the relationship between how fast you're blowing your air and how much you engage your aperture around that air. There's a diagram that I am going to put up on the screen here from the Thompson Buzzing book. It's a wonderful book by James Thompson that goes through a lot of different buzzing techniques with your embouchure, with your mouthpiece, on the horn. It's a great sequence to go through, but there's a picture in there that I especially love that shows the air going through the aperture and it having this pressure that it exerts out away from that air column against your lips. And then it also shows those directional arrows of your lips sort of engaging back around that air pressure to keep your aperture the same the whole time. We need to understand how that works because it's variable. It changes all the time. When you play with, if you're using faster air to play a higher note, it's going to want to push those lips apart more and more and more. And if you let it, you won't go any higher in your range. You'll just get a lot louder, but you won't go any higher because your air speed is staying the same. So as we blow faster, we need to engage a little bit more around that air column to keep the size of your aperture the same. Once we understand that relationship and we know that there's this kind of symbiotic connection between airspeed and engagement of the aperture and the embouchure, we can start to work with it across different kinds of exercises on the trumpet and really introduce this efficiency to everything that we do. I like to begin working on this assessment of my efficiency by using flow studies. A great one that most people know is the Chickowitz flow studies. If you haven't played them yourself, I'm sure that you've probably heard some people around you play it before. But I really like using these flow studies because I can assess, is my sound wonderful the whole time, but am I also using great technique the whole time? Am I staying efficient the whole time? Really allows me to do that. So as I play this, I'm thinking, can I keep that symbiotic relationship the same of increased airspeed to aperture engagement? Can I keep my tongue shaped in a way that's going to get that air straight to my aperture? And am I increasing my airspeed at the right amount coming from my lungs? All these things I'm trying to balance and make sure they work together as I play through what is a relatively a simple exercise, a Chikowitz study. And if it's going fairly well, if I feel like these components are working well together, I'll test it further. I'll just continue the Chikowitz as high as I can go or as high as I feel like is really necessary to test my playing for the day. If I can keep those elements in balance with each other of using my airspeed in conjunction with aperture engagement, if I can keep the tongue pointing that air where it needs to go, and I can keep my lungs open and functioning as they should, I can play really wherever I want to in the course of the horn without too much trouble. What that means in the long term is that I can use power, I can play for a long time, I can play in different ranges, including the high register, without that much effort and for a long time. At the end of the day, if I've been playing like this, for several sets, or I've been doing a very long recording session, or I've been playing multiple concerts, I can get to the end of the day feeling confident in my playing, knowing that if I trust these principles, although I might be a little more tired, I'm not losing any of my technique, and I'll still be able to play the demands of the job.